So in this short clip from a Superman cartoon, we can see how cartoons were used to promote a kind of patriarchal, patriotic, and political agenda that sort of appealed to and drew on notions of hegemonic masculinity. And obviously, this is a cartoon that was intended to be sort of targeted at young children, and superheroes often appeal to boys, young boys. So we can see this as a kind of piece of gender propaganda. So it was meant to sort of promote and indoctrinate young boys into sort of accepting masculine roles and norms. And at the same time, we'll watch a clip from this cartoon that illustrates how they were also promoting this idea of the male other. So a man who represented, in this case, it's a Japanese man who represents the kind of anti-masculinity. So he is conveyed as sort of weak, unmanly, and inferior next to the more sort of hegemonic masculinity of Superman. Okay, so let's watch this short clip here.
This looks like a job for Superman.
Stop where you are. Leave plane immediately, or girl will be released.
Okay, little man, you win.
So in that cartoon, we saw how Superman was depicted as the sort of hegemonic American male. It took place, or that cartoon was released in 1942, so this was just right before the US sort of became involved in World War II. And here we have, Superman not only sort of rescuing Lois Lane, this woman in distress, very sort of stereotypical superhero archetype. We also have him crushing his enemies, in this case, this very stereotypically racist portrayal of the Japanese man. So obviously this is an example of a kind of gendered propaganda, political propaganda that was used to appeal to young men, boys, and sort of help promote sort of patriotism and also the American military efforts. So in the examples that we've seen and talked about so far, we've looked at, G.I. Joe as a kind of toy that was used, or that boys would use to sort of as a kind of role model in which they could emulate a very sort of violent type of masculinity, and it also appealed to the sort of American patriotism of the military service. I briefly mentioned Call of Duty, and if you remember, Jackson Katz in his documentary Tough Guys used Call of Duty as an example of how you know military service right now appeals and uses video games as a way to recruit young men into the military service. And the appeal of sort of Call of Duty is, those first person shooter games also represent a kind of violent type of masculinity and reward the game player when they successfully kill the enemy. So games like this, again, promote a type of masculinity and violence together, and are used to draw young men into normalizing these ideas about masculinity as violent, and ties together notions of respect and being a hero and being courageous with being violent. So we can look more closely at violent masculinity as the message behind military service. And in this way, we see that war is being used to promote ideas of men as warrior types. So becoming a soldier means you become this killing machine almost, right? So your skill set involves being tough, being powerful, being dominant, and asserting one's dominance through violence and aggression. So these are some ways in which young boys can be socialized and into a violent type of masculinity. So the military often functions as a kind of means whereby once recruited, young men will transform into warriors. So they become violent. And it's often in the basic training of military service where these young men are taught to be quote unquote real men by fighting and killing. So part of this enactment of doing one's gender, of being, doing masculinity, being a man, is to become masterful in the skill set of fighting and killing. So we can see how these two things are being equated. So masculinity and violence are equated within the military structure. So in many ways, military masculinity becomes a kind of hyper masculinity, or in other words, a kind of anti-femininity. So not only are masculinity and femininity defined in opposition to one another, but military masculinity negates and opposes any type of femininity within soldiers. So if you have qualities attributed normally to femininity, including, uh, you know, any sort of emotional sensitivity, empathy, nurturing, caring, compassion, qualities that we traditionally associate with being womanly or feminine. If this is exuded or expressed by a soldier, it will be labeled and persecuted or punished. So we have military masculinity denying and demonizing any feminine qualities in soldiers. And if a soldier were to convey any sense of weakness or any traditionally feminine qualities or attributes, there is a punishment that can be enforced. So that soldier can be humiliated, they can be ridiculed, they can be labeled and ostracized, and a number of different ways in which if one doesn't meet the gender norms of military masculinity, there are consequences. So military structure often sort of includes a very strict sense of order and hierarchical structure. So you think of sort of how a military system is based on one's position or rank, and implicit in this structure is an element of conformity and compliance. So when you accept the military service and are recruited, it's sort of up to you to follow the rules and obey the structures that are part of the system. So this means that, you know, conformity and compliance is of utmost importance. So there's not a lot of room for, you know, being independent or thinking outside the box or expressing your free will and independence. It's the system sort of necessitates a need to comply with the rules and order that is set in place. And conformity is a large part of that. So conforming to the protocols of military service, falling in line with your fellow soldiers. Submitting to authority is part of this. So the military structure is based on a kind of social environment based on leadership, male leadership in most cases, and you're supposed to do what you're told from the higher ups, right? So if you're under command of the general, he gives you commands, you follow through. So you have no sort of way to question authority. You're supposed to do as you're told. And this can often cause a lot of sort of conflict and inner sense of duality for soldiers who feel like their personal beliefs are in conflict with their higher ups, right? So in that sense, you could have a conflict between an individual and the sort of military leadership. But it is a hierarchy, so you, as a soldier, if you're part of this system, you have to respect the hierarchical structure. So generals will, so if you're a general, you give your command, and then the sort of captain will implement the general's command, and then if you're a lieutenant, you're in charge of organizing your men in order to complete the general's mission for you, and it sort of falls in line that way. So you have a sort of really rigid structure of power and privilege, and you're not supposed to question whoever is sort of higher up in this power structure. So you have to sort of just do what you were told. And within the structure, there's also a measure of mental and physical endurance that must be endured as well. So any sense of struggle, physical or mental, is sort of supposed to be cast aside to accomplish any mission that you are given. So your strength in terms of physical and mental is utmost important as well in maintaining the military structure. So you'll remember from our previous lecture that homosocial means same-sex relationships. So we can think about the military as a kind of homosocial environment. And even though now both sexes are accepted into military service, historically the military has been, you know, exclusively male at certain points in history. So for certain wars, only sort of male soldiers were fighting. But what does it mean to say that the military is a homosocial environment? It means that it is dominated by the same sex relationships between